Glory paused for more than a moment, purple and gold butterflies landed on her talons or head. Perhaps they thought she was a flower. They stayed away from Starflight's darker scales. The rainwings moved through the treetops with a weird grace, using their tails or spreading their wings to glide between the trees. It looked more like swimming in the air than flying. Glory wasn't sure she'd ever get the hang of it, but it made sense, since straight flying between the densely packed trees would be difficult for creatures the size of dragons. Starflight kept smacking into vines as he tried to keep up with them. Glory wondered if he was wishing he'd accepted the offer to be knocked out in a net like the others. She saw Sunny's net soar past them, handed smoothly from talon to talon, from rainwing to rainwing. With a quick glance to make sure no one was watching her, Glory tried wrapping her tail around a branch and swinging in a full circle, like the other rainwings did. Almost there, Jambu said, landing beside her. His weight on the branch threw off her swing, and she ended up hanging upside down by her tail for an awkward moment. With a grin, he reached down and helped haul her back upright. Her back talons gripped the rough bark of the branch. It felt like ancient dragon scales under her claws. "You really aren't from around here," he said. "No," Glory said, as Starflight thudded down clumsily on the branch as well. "My egg was stolen from the rainwings 6 years ago." "Well, I can take you out tree gliding anytime you want to practice," he said. "I bet you'll figure it out pretty quickly." He spread his wings and leaped off again. Glory frowned at his departing pink tail. "Yeah, that was weird," Starflight said, answering her unspoken thought. "Wasn't it?" As if he didn't care at all, Glory said. "He didn't ask who stole me, or where I was raised, or even act like he remembered an egg getting stolen. As if eggs just vanish all the time. No big deal." She scratched her ruff thoughtfully. "Well, whatever. Maybe they do. Maybe there is a rainforest monster, and the dragons are used to losing eggs to it." "That is really, really not comforting," Starflight said. He wrapped his black wings closer to himself, peering down at the forest floor as if he expected something toothy to pop up and try to grab him. Comforting. Glory couldn't think of any particularly comforting explanations for Jambu's lack of interest in her abduction. Perhaps he's just a weird dragon who doesn't pay attention to dragonets or eggs. Surely the rest of my tribe will care. "Come on, let's keep up," she said to Starflight. A few swings and glides later, suddenly all the rainwings around them veered up, spiraling even higher into the treetops. Starflight made an anxious noise as the nets whooshed by with their unconscious friends in them. And then the dragons started to land, and Glory began to see the home of the rainwings. "Oh," she breathed. She stopped to hover in the air so she could look at everything. The iridescent colors of the dragons brought the hidden world forward. Otherwise, the village was camouflaged as well as any rainwing. Wide vine walkways, shimmering with talon-sized orange orchids, hung between leafy platforms. A few of the tree houses had low walls or woven ceilings. Others were open to the sky and carpeted with soft white flowers like fallen clouds. Glory spotted a few of the sleepy gray sloths, ambling or swinging between the walkways. She wondered if they weren't smart enough to know they were surrounded by dragons who could eat them at any moment. "This is the coolest place I've ever seen," Glory thought triumphantly.
Psst, we've been keeping a big secret. Black Friday is coming soon. Get ready for the best deals of the year. Head over to thewirelessage.com and sign up to be the first in line for all the amazing promotions. Remember, shh, it's a secret.
"And it's my place." "Visitors!" Liana called. She had one corner of Clay's net in her claws. Carefully, she and the other rainwings lowered him onto a platform wide enough for 20 dragons. Glory swept up to land beside him and watched her tribe gently set down her other friends. Dragon heads popped up all around the village. Glory realized that most of them were in hanging contraptions like hammocks. She studied the closest one. It was strung between two trees, sturdily woven of vines and lined with violet feathers and blue petals. The dragon inside was impossible to see until he poked his head out. His scales matched the green and purple around him perfectly. Clever, Starflight said, tilting his head at the hammock. He glanced to the ground miles below them and shivered. I certainly wouldn't want to sleep up this high without something like that. Look at that hammock design. You can't fall out. And with rain-wing camouflage, enemies aren't likely to spot you either. Glory glanced down at her scales and saw a color rolling through them that she'd never seen on herself before. A vibrant blue-purple she guessed meant pride. She was proud of her tribe. She'd barely met them, and already they were as impressive as she'd hoped. So there, Guardians, she thought. All those years of making me sleep on uncomfortable rock ledges in the dark, and who are the backward dragons exactly? I know, isn't it pretty? We quite like our village too, Liana said, practically in Glory's ear. Glory jumped back, flicking the tail. All right, there was one thing that made her uncomfortable. The way the other rain-wings looked at her as if they expected to understand every thought she had, just by reading her scales. She clamped down on her emotions, turning her scales back to a treetop green that matched the background. Liana didn't seem ruffled by Glory's reaction. The rain-wing scanned the leaves overhead, then smiled as 5 small dragons in shades of sky blue and copper dropped through the canopy toward them. Hope you're hungry, Liana said, as the dragons opened their talons. Strange shapes bounced and rolled across the platform, bumping against Glory's sleeping friends. Glory picked up the one closest to her, lime green and star-shaped. It smelled like pineapple and basil. She poked it with one claw, wondering if she had to peel it. Under the mountain, the dragonettes had almost never eaten fruit. She knew more from reading about it in scrolls than from the few berries Webbs had sometimes brought back. Queen Scarlet was the one who'd given her pineapple. Don't think about Queen Scarlet. Starflight scanned the platform with a disappointed expression. Is all of this fruit? He asked. Isn't there any meat? Liana wrinkled her nose. You can hunt if you want, she said, but really, it's a waste of energy. She glanced up at the sky again. And it's almost our sun time, so if you must, then do it quietly. Sun time? Glory asked. Oh, sweetheart. Liana shook her head. Is that what's wrong with you? I was not aware that anything was wrong with me, Glory said, firmly keeping her scales from changing color. Not from a rain-wing point of view, anyway. It's just your scales, Liana said. They're so mousy. Glory stared at her. Mousy? You know, Liana said apologetically. A little dull. Not like ours. She stretched out one wing and let a waterfall of rainbows ripple through it. Is she saying I'm not as beautiful as other rain-wings? Certainly they were all very bright and shiny. Maybe her own scales weren't quite as vibrant. Glory wasn't sure what to think of that. In fact, she was pretty sure she didn't care. She'd always been the pretty one, and it had never gotten her anywhere, other than chained to a decorative tree in the Skywing Palace. So, tell me about sun time, she said with a shrug. A few streaks of orange and emerald flashed through Liana's scales, and then vanished into dark blue again. Orange and emerald. If their scales worked the same way, then that meant Liana was feeling a little surprised and a little irritated, as if she'd hoped to prod more of a reaction out of Glory. This scale reading business can go both ways, my new friends. Sometime, Liana said smoothly, as if her scales hadn't changed at all. It's the hours when the sun is highest, so we climb up as close to it as we can and sleep. Oh, Starflight interjected, in his figuring things out voice. Glory, it's like those naps you always take after lunch. I knew that must be a rain-wing thing, but I could never figure out the point. Why sleep in the middle of the day? Don't you all have anything more important to do? Glory flicked her tail and narrowed her eyes at him, but Liana didn't seem offended. The sun recharges our scales while we sleep, she explained. It makes us prettier, better at camouflage, smarter, and happier. What could be more important than that? Oh, Starflight said again. She studied Glory like a scroll that finally made sense. Oh, Happier? Like, less grouchy? Shut up, Glory said, giving him a shove. She'd already put some of these pieces together in her own mind. She knew that what the Guardians had done, keeping her trapped underground, away from the sun her whole life, had probably made her into a grumpier, less powerful dragon than she could have been. But she didn't need the others figuring that out, because she didn't need their pity. And who knew what she would have been like otherwise? Being prickly was kind of an essential part of being Glory, if you asked her. The truth was, in the Sky Kingdom, where Queen Scarlet left her in the sun all day, Glory had never felt happier or more at peace, or less like herself. She knew it was the effect of the sun and nothing else. She knew that what she'd experienced was like finally getting to eat as much as she needed after a lifetime of starvation. She knew that Queen Scarlet was evil, and that Glory was only another sparkly piece of treasure to her. Part of her had hated it, hated the weird sleepiness and the unmotivated contentment that made her feel like a puddle of slugs. And yet there was a part of her that could have stayed that way forever. She shook herself fiercely. "So go sleep," she said to Liana. "We're not going anywhere." The other rain wings who'd carried the nets had already flown off to higher platforms in the treetops. Some were sprawled out in open patches of sun, while others were stretched inside the clever hammocks, snoring. "True," said Liana. "We'll wake up before your friends do." "Don't you want to ask all your questions first?" Starflight said to Glory. "Don't you want to find your family and—" "There's no rush," Glory said, cutting him off. "They're asleep now anyway. The answers will be the same in a few hours." She knew she was good at looking like she didn't care. She particularly wanted Liana to think she didn't care. It was lucky that questions couldn't parade across her scales like her emotions, or she'd have been covered in them. But she wasn't about to look desperate in her first moments with her new tribe. They certainly didn't seem to have a million questions for her. So fine, she could act like this reunion was no big deal to her either. Maybe acting cool and unconcerned was a natural Rainwing thing. Starflight scratched his head. "Can we at least ask about the monster?" "Monster?" Liana laughed. "There's no such thing as monsters." "Really?" Starflight asked. "Then what's killing Mudwing soldiers on your borders?" "Oh," Liana said. "That monster." Starflight's wings flared, and his eyes went wide as the moon's. Liana burst out laughing. "Your face," she cried. "That was so worth it. I'm just kidding, little black dragon. I don't know anything about any dead Mudwings, but I do know we don't have any monsters here." "Just relax, Starflight," Glory said. "Think about libraries or something." "Little dragon," Jambu called from a perch high above Glory's head. She squinted up at him, dazzled by the bright light reflecting off his magenta scales. "Are you joining us for suntime? Want a hammock?" he offered. "Or a platform?" Glory blinked at her friends. Clay was snoring louder than all the rain wings combined. Tsunami frowned even in her sleep, her claws twitching, as if she dreamed about fighting. Sunny was curled up in a peaceful ball, like a snoozing chinchilla, and Webbs, with his shallow breathing, looked and sounded halfway dead. If they weren't going to wake up soon anyway... "Go ahead," Starflight said. "It's okay. I'll watch them." He shook his wings and puffed out his chest imposingly, which came across a bit like a tree frog trying to look menacing. "Wake me if you need to," Glory said. "If I hear someone shrieking like a tiny scavenger, I'll assume it's you." Starflight huffed in outrage as Glory scooped up a couple of mysterious fruits and flew to Jambu's branch. "I'll take a platform," she said, landing beside the pink rainwing. "You sure?" he asked. "Usually dragonettes stick to the hammocks, in case they roll off in their sleep. You'd wake up before hitting the ground, but you'd probably hit a few other things first. So, we're not talking death or anything, but some serious ouch." "I'll be fine," Glory said. She'd never fallen off the ghastly rock ledge where she'd been forced to sleep for 6 years, and even in her sky